Welcome to the Green Lectionary Podcast, a production of Creation Justice Ministries. Green Lectionary is a conversation on Scripture through the lens of creation justice. My name is Derek Weston, and today we will be looking at a text for the sixth Sunday in Lent. For this episode, I'm joined by Katy Steinberg, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Daytona Beach, Joshua Long, Congregational organizer at Interfaith Power and Light, D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia, and Avery Davis Lamb, co-executive director of Creation Justice Ministries. Before we begin our episode, a quick plug for one of Creation Justice Ministries' other programs, Blue Theology. Blue Theology is a place where current science and marine biology meets the theology of creation justice. Each summer, we host youth groups to engage in experiential learning, service projects, and contemplative practice with God's marine creation. We have outposts in North Carolina, Newport Beach, California, and Texas City, Texas, and registration is open now. To learn more, go to www.bluetheology.com. Our text for this week is a commonly known one. It is Mark chapter 11, verses 1 to 11. When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it and will send it back here immediately.'" They went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. So, where is creation in this passage?
So I'll kick us off. That's okay. So what strikes me is the significance of place, like visceral space, like being able to see like what is happening in this story. From the time of, you know, approaching Jerusalem, so on the road, and then uh the significance of near the Mount of Olives, um, and the in not just the engagement of the cults, but the ability to kind of see um, Jesus riding on the colts, Jesus coming down this road, doing this processional, if you will, the branches being thrown down. It's this whole thing is not possible without creation in a way. It's um, it just feels like a very real, tangible thing that's happening, and that just strikes me very. It's very interesting to me to think about that and what that means. As this is, um, I mean, this we're coming down to um, um, the final days of Jesus' ministry. This is a big entrance, you know, and to consider what that means, both Jesus as a human being, Jesus' relationship with creation, but also the incarnation as well. What this means incarnationally of um this idea of God being with us, but God riding on a donkey, on a colt, um and the significance of what that looked like, considering especially the backdrop of empire, the backdrop of you know the display that kings had, just displaying riches and whatnot. And Jesus is specifically like, we're getting a colt. That's um one thing I did point out was that a colt that has never been ridden, there is still these drawbacks like purity of that come up in there. You know, I was thinking of the virgin birth as well, but just these some of these notions of of idea of, and maybe this is more of ancient Jewish custom, but the ideas of um cleanliness, you know, and that's just kind of from a first reading and whatnot. But like I said, the engagement with creation, I think, is most key, and I think it's telling for us as well. Is just kind of considering how embodied we need to be. You know, how our relationship with creation needs to be very real, and we need to consider that in our both in our day-to-day lives and when there are these big triumphant events. To go, let someone else go.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua. I appreciate that. The both the notion of how it's all surrounded in creation, but the thing that also popped out for me listening to what you've described in addition to the scripture is the provision. When I think about um, preparing for a big event nowadays, I'm like, did somebody pre-order the cult? We need the cult in the right place. Okay, cue the cult. Who's got the plant palm frond? Literally, okay, side note here. I have a pastor friend. It was her first time being a pastor in Florida. And we were approaching Palm Sunday, and she's like, did somebody order the palms? And all of us just laughed hysterically because we're in Florida, they're everywhere. Like, you take a little knife outside and you just cut a few palms, right? Like, there's provision. But depending on where you're coming from, it's not. And so, another version of this passage talks about the crying out, that even the stones would cry out, right? That's not in this version, but it just strikes me over and over again that the provision that is there. Jesus didn't pre-order the colts. Like, go find the colt. Okay, it's going to be there, right? Nobody said, hey, everybody, like, or at least that not that's recorded. Hey, everybody, go get some palm fronds, go get your coats, like, get ready, like, this is going to happen. But that there's just this natural provision of creation, and it's so countercultural uh, to today, and how I think about, even as we prepare for church and worship and these kind of things, who's prepared this, who coached the kids to wave the little fronds so everything is cute and sweet and blah blah blah, just sort of the contrast of the performance versus the provision. And that's what draws my senses back to creation, and that the breaking through of the kingdom is happening. Like, they're acknowledging it, Hosanna, salvation, our savior. The breaking through of the kingdom is happening while creation provides, not because I have pre-prepared, pre-thought, pre-ordered, broken down, figured out, planned every detail, which is just such a countercultural idea to me today, and makes me wonder about how it would have been, as you pointed to, Josh, with like when a king was coming, right? There would have been all of this pre-planning and provision. Make sure it looks good. Okay. Make sure I look good. And instead we get this contrast of just using what is there, the spur of the moment, the provision, the excitement, the interest. And then I love this little last part. It was late, so he goes out. It's like, okay, we tired, we're gonna take a rest now. Once again, it's like provision. It's like, wait, who could rest at a time like this? Who could sleep? Like, you're here, and all this, the parade and the boom and the whatever, it all just happened, and the cult was there, and it was magic. And I just can sort of imagine, if I was one of the disciples, I'd be like, Jesus, come on, we just got here. Like, let's do some stuff, man. Like, you're freaking God. Let's do some cool stuff.
Let's
Like,
party it up.
yeah, it's happening, man. It's happening. Like, the coats and the rocks and the palm fronds and all that, and he's like, it's late. Let's go take a rest, y'all. And I just love that about, because again, it's this countercultural, can imagine the voices of today saying, don't lose your momentum. Don't lose your you got the crowd
Mhm.
now, Jesus. Come on, do some big stuff. Let's do the fishes and loaves thing again. That was cool. Let's do that one. And she's like, now we're gonna go take a rest. So for me, also, this theme of enoughness and provision just continues to come through, that like the miraculous and the kingdom breaking through is happening right in the middle of this like sensible rhythm that is not encouraged culturally these days, and probably not by empire then either, is my guess.
Hmm, that's so good. Just a few reflections that brings up for me. I guess first of all, Josh, what you were saying with the Mount of Olives, this passage is bookended with trees, because they're coming from the Mount of Olives, and then right after this is when Jesus curses the fig tree, which is, an interesting Markan strategy of putting that in the middle of this narrative. But it's bookended by trees, right? And then, yeah, Katy, I'm so intrigued by this theme of performance, and that what Jesus is doing here is it's a counter performance. It's a counter performance to, the march of the empire, and then it's also an anticlimax, which Mark as a whole is sort of an anticlimax, and then this is a microcosm of that, right? There's this whole thing of getting to the temple, and then he's like, all right, I'm gonna go out, to the garden with my friends now. And I don't want to skip ahead too much to what this means for the church, but maybe I'll just say I think this means something for the church as far as how we think about the performance of all of this. So I'll leave it there with where I see creation.
I'm so grateful that you brought up how Mark tends to capture these things too, because, for him, it would seem that the humanity of Christ is so important, like the groundedness, the tangibility. And so again, that really just brings out thinking of it in a Markan context as like, yeah, this is all very tangible and real. Like he comes in on a donkey or a colt or whatever, whatever way you want to capture that, right? And it's just like cloaks and tree branches, whatever's around. And then he gets there and, hey, gonna go chill, like gonna go take a nap. And it's just so relatable the way that Mark tries to capture the humanity of Jesus, not just making it, so spiritual, so other. And that's really a gift, I think, that he brings us.
Yeah, well, and thinking about the performance of empire is exceeding the limits of humanity.
Right.
Right? It's us trying to do something that is beyond that which we should do as humans, and it's also forcing other creatures to do things that are not natural to their creaturely well-being, right? The contrast, the counter performance of the war horse, which was, you know, a, a tool, covered with armor, whatever they covered with, all these like blankets, that was trained as a tool for war, that the purpose of that animal was warped to kill and to conquer, versus a young colt that's never been ridden, right? It's also about limits here.
And that's what's interesting about we have the event is the entry into Jerusalem, and then we enter Jerusalem. Jesus goes into the temple, and in Mark's gospel again, we'd have this. That's enough for today, because we'll stir up some. We're gonna do the money changers thing tomorrow. Well, like in the sign, I think in the other gospels, kind of just like you know they want to get to that, and this is just like let's kind of pause. Like it literally says it's already late. Let's retreat. This is and I can you can kind of almost see them going into the temple together, and then sort of like we'll be back tomorrow. And it's just very, very, like I said, very visual, very real, very human story that again shows we can't do it all. There is this push and pull. There is this time where we have to say tomorrow. There's plenty to do.
Yeah, you just kind of blew my mind with highlighting that the colt had never been ridden versus this trained, well-groomed stallion, like that I imagine the war horse of empire. Man, that just kind of, in fact, it kind of makes me want to like write something like colt and cloaks, it's like whatever is here is enough. And God's the one who makes it, other and amazing and beautiful. I mean, communion vibes, right? Like never ridden, untrained. We bring what we have, and it's and it'll be enough. Wow, loving that.
Well, and on that too, I know we have other questions to get to, Derek, but this is good. The we have what we need. We have provision, And also, the things that we think will save us are not the things that will save us. That's one of the messages that I read of Jesus getting to the temple and then leaving. That what the disciples probably thought was going to happen is that he would get there, which, the temple, I've heard the temple described as the Vatican, Wall Street, and Capitol Hill all rolled up together. That he would get there and he would be crowned king, right? And then that's it. But he gets there and then they leave, right? Because that's not what's going to save them, and that's not what's going to save us.
The other piece, and again, this is just the way my mind works, is that this unridden colt and this ride on this unridden colt had to have been awkward and super clumsy. Like, this colt is just like, what the heck are you doing back there? And it's not polished, and it's not Katie, to your point about performance, it's not professional. Like, there's nothing about this that's professional, but it's all very organic and earthy, and like, it's real. It's very real. The other piece that I, so often we try really hard to not make these distinctions between humanity and creation, recognizing that, humanity is part of creation. But almost everywhere that you see creation in this story, it's being used by humanity. Humans are using creation. Um, but like, not in a way that feels exploitative, not in a way that feels overly extractive or abusive. Like, the relationship with creation is there. That doesn't feel like it's humans using creation in a way that is ultimately glorifying God. Like, ultimately, every use of creation here is to honor and glorify God, which means that there's got to be honoring and glorifying ways of, making use of creation, right? um and part of the way that comes into is like also being able to say it's night and we're done, and so we stop. We're not using creation anymore, and all that's gonna rest. There's so many beautiful things going on here that you all have brought out, and so I just um and I think we've touched on this a little bit in some ways, but um so where are we being called, how are we being called to interact with creation based off this story? I think some of those things have already come up, but how are we called to interact with creation um in this passage, um this Palm Sunday passage?
One of the things that comes up for me, and this is sort of along the provision themes, but there's like a trust factor here for me, trusting that the cult's going to be there. The people, I mean, I'm sort of resonating too with the people who like have to give over this cult, right? Like there's a trust factor there. And I don't know that I'd ever really caught this and it will be returned to you piece that was, I'm like, oh, so it's not just like give it up and then I'm out my like one possible cart horse or whatever. I don't know. But it's like this is gonna come back to you in some way. And yeah, so I mean there's this trust what we're called to give is another piece that of that provision that feels like uh, it, I think sometimes when we contribute, whether that's we're contributing to nature, contributing our energy, contributing our time, our money, whatever, there's this thing like that it feels like loss to us. And what I'm hearing in some of this is a reminder that it comes back to us and that when we contribute, it's, sort of there's like this greater good piece that can happen, that can glorify, that can multiply, which, that multiplication is obviously a biblical theme in a gospel theme in other places in text, but I think that was highlighted and new for me in this question. So thanks for asking it.
Where do I want to start here? The I want to talk about the economy of creation that we see in this passage. One piece of the cult narrative is that it's, like Katie was saying, it's borrowed and not purchased. And I think that's really important. I am starting seeds right now. I'm getting really into native plants. I'm like neck deep in native plants. It's so much fun. And it's so easy to get caught up in gardening as another act of consumerism instead of gardening as an entering into the economy of creation. And it doesn't take that long as a gardener, especially with native plants, to learn that the economy of creation is abundance.
Mm-hmm.
Plants, you know, an individual plant will create thousands of seeds. It'll send out, roots and shoots and rhizomes that, spread around my yard and garden, but that also should be shared with my neighbor, right? And an exchange, sort of a gift economy of creation. So I think this is good news for creation. It's good news for horses. I when I say that, I feel like I'm embodying Ken from the Barbie movie. That I wish patriarchy was just about the horses, but this is good news for horses, because if Jesus is Lord, if Jesus is the leader, if we live in the economy of creation instead of the economy of empire, that colt doesn't have to worry about being purchased, being trained as a war horse, and then dying at the end of the sword. Right? That it's instead a participant in the economy of creation, working together with Jesus to take him up to the temple as this counter performance to the economy of empire.
First of all, I want to echo everything that Avery and Katie you're saying, and thinking about this economy of creation that is abundant, that is not exploitative, that is not extractive, um, that is his trust and give and take. That is, we're just going to borrow the colt today. It will be returned to you. The other thing that stood out to me amidst that was the cloaks. And Katie said you might do a sermon, Colts and Cloaks. Like, there's so many directions you can go with that. Uh, but I thought my initial thoughts was the spreading of the cloaks and what that would mean in a world where fast fashion isn't like the reality, where if you had more than like 3 cloaks, like it was a big deal, or whatever, and even one, like it's just a big deal to have, you know, multiple, garments and stuff, So, and I'm thinking about that today. One, the significance of spreading one's cloak, you know, as a ritual processional for Jesus and what that meant. Um, you know, because they're going to pick up that cloak and still use it, you know. And today, I mean, we'll buy an outfit for a specific event, and then that outfit is quote unquote not usable anymore. Um, and I've been thinking about that a lot lately, partially as I understanding the way our clothing is made, that it's just a lot of our clothing is just fossil fuels. That polyester is just oil, and the need when we move into climate justice, environmental justice, um, talking about getting off of fossil fuels, how the conversations of our cloaks are really important. And, you know, thinking about why do we feel the need to buy so many cloaks? Why do we feel the need to, you know, have it's not even so much the consumerism part, that's a big piece of it, but I think it's the whole idea of extraction, exploitation for some grand idea of prosperity or image of wealth, of image of we have, or image of something. And as mentioned before, this story is so countercultural, um, that it's not about the image, but it's about the realness. And I think some of the ways our systems work today, um, in empire, really try to pull us away from what's real, from what's tangible, from real creation, from uh, you know, being able to just experience creation, experience nature, experience um, other living beings, and pull us into these things that you know may seem nice on the surface, but you know, what purpose do they really serve? Does it bring God glory? Does it bring um is it elevating Christ in the way of Christ, which is love and justice, to, you know, own so many articles of clothing, to have so many cloaks, to have so many things. And so I I never try to come at this from a place of judgment because we live in this culture. This is the water we swim in. However, thinking about this story, thinking about Jesus, God with us, the incarnation, and in Passion Week, and what all that means for us as Christians and just the world, I I had to sit and pause and think about the ways in which the systems of empire we're caught up in, um, how we can be different in our own lives, and what are the things we can do to really shift narratives to be more like the story, of being more organic, being more real, be more tangible, if you will.
Joshua, my mind went somewhere different but parallel when you started talking about the cloaks. Um, the verse that talks about the cloaks talks about um, some people threw down cloaks, and some people took branches from the field, leafy branches from the field, and they didn't unearth trees; they just took the branches. Um, and like, yeah, maybe people got their cloaks back, maybe. Um, but there's like an equal amount of sacrifice of creation and humanity here. Like, it wasn't asking something of creation that humans weren't also willing to do. Like, we're giving up our cloaks, you're giving up your leaves. And again, you only have one cloak, and you only have a set amount of leaves. And we're both going to sacrifice for this endeavor. And it's we're equal contributors to this task. And so often we are asking of creation to give so much more,
Mm,
to give to the point of non-existence, to give to the point of extinction, to give to the point of starvation, to give to the point of loss of ecosystem. And here it is of like, we're going to sacrifice, you're going to sacrifice, because that's what communities do. That's how a community works. That's how community operates. And even Katie, to your point, and this was also a noticing for me for the first time of the cult being borrowed, not purchased. Like, the cult will go back. That, like, that we're all. This is a very this is a very communal event. This is, and Avery, to your point about economy, this is all very, like, there's a lot of reciprocity here. There's a lot of mutuality here. Everything feels very cyclical, and I feel like there is a challenge to recognize ourselves as part of these cycles, where if we're going to ask something of our trees, then we need to be willing to give something up as well. If we're going to ask something of the soil, then we need to be willing to give a piece of ourselves. If we're going to ask something of the water, then we need to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just so much. There's a little ecosystem that is built in this story, just in these, like, 11, 12 verses. This little ecosystem, this little story where there's reciprocity and mutuality, and it's really pretty lovely. It's kind of this beautiful little community, and like so many of the little beautiful communities in the Bible, it's temporary. But we get a glimpse, we get a glimpse of something, and something to which we can aspire.
I want to go back as well, just to something Joshua said that's bouncing around in my head, which is thinking about both individual and systemic sin here. I think, Josh, you were talking about what I would call individual sin of our desire to overconsume. But of course, at the same time, we're caught up in systems of systemic sin that drive us to overconsume, whether we really choose to or not. And I think on both levels, there's two visions that this passage is putting forward. The contrast of provision, like Katy said, that's really sticking with me, of we have what we need, versus extraction, we extract what we want. And that's playing out both at an individual level, understanding that we have what we need in terms of our community, creation, or we extract what we want, and we just keep consuming without any regard. And also the world under which we live, the economy and the political structures under which we live, that can either say we have what we need or we extract what we want.
So in light of all of these things, where is there a call to action for us coming from this passage?
Well, and I keep coming back to, the provision, the divine economy, and trusting that, and what that means for us. If we can actually live into that, instead of living into the scarcity mindset, or instead of the series of excuses that tell us that it's impossible, or, even taking a step toward, for us to just give up everything and, have one cloak and, hope that there's a cult around the corner that can take me to work, is probably not super realistic, right? But I can take a step toward, and I can start to sort of, in even a small way, invest in the divine economy, if you will, right? Put a little bit in there, and then watch how it grows and changes, and what it might. I take my one tree branch, I take my one cloak, and I then become part of, this triumphal entry, right? Instead of the numbers of excuses about, well, the world is the way it is, so I can't participate in this, kingdom breaking through. It's just too easy to hide behind that, even if I'm going to stumble into it clumsily on a borrowed cult, right? So I think that there's just such an invitation to take a step, to lean into trust in some way, to lean into provision in some way, and then begin to build the trust in the enoughness of all of that, in the divine economy. Because I can't take everything that has the water I'm swimming in, as we've used, this world I'm living in, the realities of the systemic mess and empire and all of it, grind culture, whatever piece, all of it, and then go, well, tomorrow I'm just going to live in the divine economy, but I also can't let the ridiculousness of that idea stop me from continuing to invest and grow, even in small ways, into greater creation care, into trusting the divine economy, into investing in what the scripture tells me over and over and over again will multiply and be abundant. So to me, like almost like a dare. Sometimes I think Jesus likes to dare us a little bit, like, okay, try it. Let's see what happens. Go ask for the colt. See what happens. Just come on, go ask for the colt. So that's what I'm taking away today.
I am wondering what it looks like to counterperform in our churches on Palm Sunday. I love Palm Sunday. I think it's so fun. I love hanging out with the plants. And I'm not convinced that the way most of our churches do Palm Sunday is actually a counterperformance. What would it look like if we actually use this as a chance to get to know our native ecosystem better? Right? There's no reason for most of our churches to use palms. It makes sense for Katy in Daytona Beach to use palms, right? But maybe what was happening in this passage is that the branches that the people were bringing were pruned branches. Maybe it was the time of year where they were pruning the trees. Late March, it's the time of years where a lot of people are going to be pruning native trees in your community. What if instead of going through the performance of ordering palms, which by the way are pretty bad for the environment to do that, instead bringing in pruned branches from our native ecosystem, from our native trees, as a way of honoring Christ and honoring the divine ecological economy that says pruning is good. And let's lay this before the Lord, and let's use this as an opportunity to both glorify the peacemaker and also draw closer to our native plants. So that's my inspiration for this year.
There's just something here about this processional takes place that is so organic, that is in many ways embodies what the this coming kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, is like, which is, hey, go get the colt. We'll just borrow the colt for the day. You know, we'll just there's the branches are around. We'll just use the branches that are around. We don't need the gold. We don't need the fancy things. And I still have this amazing triumphant entry where they're saying, Hosanna, save us, from the Psalms. Psalm 118, save us. And what I found interesting is this the crowd is shouting, save us, and the crowd is, blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David, Hosanna in the highest heaven. This big triumphant cheer. And again, this anticlimax that happens afterwards of just enter Jerusalem, or withdrawing. And there's many levels I think that we're called to. One being that the the work of salvation is an ongoing process. The fact that um, Jesus is not coming to the temple and, as people are expecting, sit on the quote unquote throne, overthrow everything, or is setting up this new kingdom that's going to overthrow empire or whatnot. But instead, we're entering into this passion narrative, and if we're doing Mark, it's all about being a suffering servant. It's all about serving others um, for the kingdom of God. That's really what Mark is about. And Mark is never about the exuberant. Mark is never about um, the flashy things, the ways that, as we mentioned before, extraction, exploitation, they're all just about more, 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 bigger, better, you know. And instead, uh, I think this passage is calling us to think of how salvation is pulling us to the moment that's here and what we need to do here. To understand what is the best way we can serve others, serve creation in this moment right now. And if that means that we're going to look at the temple and say, tomorrow we have work to do, and tomorrow we have work to do. There's a fig tree to curse tomorrow, which is really exciting. the money, there's going to be there's a whole bunch of exploitation going on in the house of worship that we're going to deal with, and it's not to say, as Katie said, like, it's not to say that, well, today we just celebrate until we win and we throw it to the future. Tomorrow we'll do that. It's to know what moments we are in this moment. And so in this moment of being a community, being organic, building real relationships with others through getting the cult, through the cloaks, through sharing together, by retreating together at night and moving into the next thing. I think all those things are a piece of the puzzle that are important, are a piece of kingdom of heaven that we have to consider. So I think I'm drawing back to say that the call that I really hear is this very present, being really this connection that is here and now with creation as it is, but also understanding the work that needs to be done ongoing that can create more justice and love in the world.
Hmm. Something that, again, for as many times as I've read this passage, a lot of new things are occurring to me today. But part of what's interesting here is that essentially the worship stops when they get to the temple. Which is like, wait a minute. And there's this piece of, they've been having worship outside. They've been having worship outside in the trees, on the road, in this very, as we've talked about, in this very real, in these very real geographies, and are around trees and around people and around, and they've been worshiping outside, and they've been calling out to God outside, and then they get to the temple, and all of that stops. And in fact, as we've kind of like peeked ahead, when we are looking ahead to the temple is actually where like the justice work needs to happen, where the like tearing down and the resetting needs to happen. But worship happened outside on the road. And I think if nothing else, there is a call to worship outside, which we talk about a lot here. But like, I think there's a call to invite creation into our worship, or maybe recognize how we've been called into creation's worship, and the ways that creation is calling us to like come back out and sing along with us. But there's also, a call to think about, to carefully consider, to stop and wonder about what our relationship to the temple is before we step into it. To like actually take that time to rest, to contemplate, to Sabbath, before we step into the temple, because there's a lot of work to do on the temple itself. because the temple's not maybe doing the same stuff that creation does, and it's supposed to be. It's supposed to. Well, that feels super awkward to say, and yet we all know it's very. We all know. We all know how real.
I have been biting my tongue so hard. I'm like, that's it. Palm Sunday, church is canceled. Get outside. Like, that's it. No more church on Sunday.
Well, if there's any day to do it, to get outside and worship, probably would be Palm Sunday.
I think it's
So good, yeah.
Well, hey, you three, thanks. This was really good. We did it. I think there's as we have been challenged so much over this Lenten season to really wrestle with, and all throughout Lent, we've been challenged to wrestle with stories that I think we read a lot, and I continually am just blessed by you all and your ability to help me see things in a text that I've had to have read hundreds of times, and see it in new ways through new eyes, and to see it through the eyes of creation, to the extent that I can. And so, Joshua and Avery and Katy, thank you so much for being on this journey with us. Thank you for joining us for the Green Lectionary Podcast. This episode was produced by Sprocket Wagner, and the music was provided by Christian McIver. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and help us spread the word with a good review. And leave us a comment to let us know how you've used the show and how we can make it more useful for your ministry. You can learn more about this and other programs of Creation Justice Ministries at creationjustice.org.
Our story comes alive within these pages, for every time and place throughout the ages. God speaks and is heard, and the enduring word calls us to care for our world as we share the love that can set creation free. Restoring the earth to wholeness, peace, and harmony. Let the songs of the water, land, and sky resound, 'cause together we're all bound. Within these pages, there's always new life to be found.